The night Naomi Clark's life shattered and rebuilt itself in the span of 30 minutes began with the sharp crack of a metal bucket hitting marble floor. 11:47 p.m., 52nd floor, Orion Tower. The sound echoed through glass walls like a gunshot, freezing every executive in the emergency boardroom meeting. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward the doorway where a young black woman stood, mop in hand, horror spreading across her face. She had interrupted Alexander Vail. The Alexander Vail, tech billionaire, aviation collector, a man whose net worth exceeded the GDP of small nations, and whose temper was legendary across 3 continents. He stopped mid-sentence, his perfectly tailored suit catching the overhead lights as he pivoted slowly toward the source of the interruption. The room held its breath. Naomi's hands trembled. She'd worked this building for 8 months, perfecting the art of invisibility. Stay quiet, stay small, survive. But tonight, her bucket had betrayed her. Vail approached with the deliberate steps of a predator, each footfall a calculated display of dominance. He stopped 3 feet from her, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne, close enough to tower over her 5'4" frame. "What is this?" His voice was ice wrapped in velvet. I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't mean to." "Trash," he said, cutting her off. The word hung in the air like poison. Trash always interrupts at the worst possible moment. Behind him, nervous laughter rippled through the boardroom. Executives who earned 6 figures shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. No one challenged Alexander Vail. "A janitor in my building should understand her place," he continued, his voice rising just enough to ensure every word carried. "Clean silently, or don't be here at all." Naomi felt the familiar burn behind her eyes, the tightness in her throat. But she'd survived worse than this. Foster care, homelessness, medical bills that crushed dreams into dust. So she did something that surprised them both. She looked him directly in the eye, not with defiance, not with anger, with dignity. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across Vail's face. Confusion, perhaps, or discomfort. Bullies never quite knew what to do when their victims refused to crumble. Then the moment passed. He turned back to his meeting, already dismissing her existence. Naomi gathered her bucket, turned her cart, and walked away. Her hands shook, her vision blurred, but she kept moving. What Alexander Vail didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that Naomi Clark wasn't just a janitor. She was the youngest person in aviation academy history to ace the advanced simulator exams. She had logged over 80 hours in real Cessnas and Pipers, solo cross-countries included, before life forced her to stop. She had memorized every specification of his prized Gulfstream G700, the $80 million ultra-long-range jet that sat in his private hangar at Teterboro Airport. She knew that plane better than most line pilots. But life had other plans. A medical emergency 2 years ago derailed her training, buried her under debt, and left her scrubbing floors in the very building that housed the company that owned the aircraft she dreamed of flying. She carried those dreams like contraband, hidden, protected, alive. And in exactly 28 minutes, Alexander Vail was going to need her. In 28 minutes, the man who called her trash would watch her hands dance across the controls of his most valuable possession. In 28 minutes, everything would change. Because sometimes the universe has a sense of timing so perfect, it feels like poetry. And sometimes, justice is delivered at 40,000 feet. If you enjoy deep, cinematic stories like this, stories that take dozens of hours to research, write, record, and edit, please consider subscribing. It truly helps us continue bringing you these narratives. Naomi Clark's alarm went off at 5:47 a.m. every morning, 3 minutes before the actual time she needed to wake. Those 3 minutes were hers alone, a small rebellion against a life that demanded every other second. She lived in a studio apartment in Queens, 4th floor walk-up, where the radiator clanged like a prisoner trying to escape, and the neighbor's television bled through paper-thin walls. Rent consumed 60% of her janitor's salary. Groceries took another 20%. The rest went to something everyone said was foolish: flight simulation software, aviation textbooks, private pilot exam prep materials. Her bedroom wall was covered in printouts, cockpit diagrams, flight patterns, weather systems, emergency procedures. To anyone else, it looked like obsession. To Naomi, it was oxygen. She'd grown up in foster care, bouncing between 5 families before aging out at 18. No safety net, no inheritance, just a stubborn refusal to let circumstances define her ceiling. Aviation chose her the first time she saw a plane up close. She was 14, on a rare field trip to JFK Airport. While other kids complained about the noise, Naomi stood transfixed at the observation window, watching a 747 defy gravity with elegant violence. That night, she checked out every book her school library had on aeronautics. By 16, she'd taught herself the basics of aerodynamics. By 19, she'd enrolled in a flight training program on a partial scholarship, working 3 jobs to cover the rest. She logged over 80 hours in real aircraft, Cessnas, Pipers, solo flights across state lines. Instructors said she had instincts that couldn't be taught, an almost supernatural ability to feel what an aircraft needed before instruments confirmed it. Then her body betrayed her. A sudden collapse during a training session, emergency room, tests, diagnosis, a rare heart arrhythmia, stress-induced, treatable but expensive. The medical bills arrived like an avalanche. Her scholarship evaporated. The program couldn't hold her spot. Just like that, the runway disappeared. She took the janitor position at Orion Tower 8 months ago. Night shift paid slightly more, and the building was usually empty. Fewer people to remind her of everything she'd lost. But there was one small mercy. Alexander Vale's aircraft were hangared at the company's private facility at Teterboro Airport, just across the river. Sometimes when executive shuttles ran late, she'd overhear pilots talking in the lobby or catch snippets of radio chatter from the company helicopter pad. She knew his collection by heart: a restored P-51 Mustang, a Gulfstream G650, a vintage Cessna 172 that once belonged to an Apollo astronaut, and the crown jewel, the Gulfstream G700, one of the most advanced business jets in the world, ultra-long range, cutting-edge avionics, and fly-by-wire systems. Vale had paid $80 million for his, and only a select few pilots were fully type-rated on it. Naomi had studied that plane obsessively for 2 years. She'd run professional-grade simulators configured for the G700 so many times she could troubleshoot its systems in her sleep. Her 80 real hours in light aircraft gave her the feel of flight. The thousands in simulation gave her mastery of complex jets. But 80 hours in simulators weren't a type rating, and janitors didn't get to touch $80 million aircraft. So she cleaned floors, emptied trash, made herself invisible. Until the night she couldn't be invisible anymore. Until the night Alexander Vale made the mistake of underestimating her. Until the night the Gulfstream G700 needed exactly the kind of expertise that couldn't be bought or inherited. Have you ever been underestimated because of your job or appearance? What happened? Share your story in the comments. Alexander Vale built his empire on 3 principles: vision, velocity, and dominance. The vision came from genuine brilliance. He'd revolutionized aviation logistics software before turning 30, creating algorithms that saved airlines billions in fuel and scheduling. The velocity came from ruthless efficiency. He moved faster than competitors could react, acquiring companies like chess pieces. The dominance? That was pure ego. Vale didn't just want to win. He wanted others to lose spectacularly. He wanted witnesses. He wanted the satisfaction of watching lesser mortals realize they'd never reach his altitude. His employees called him a genius behind closed doors. His competitors called him a shark. Those who'd worked closely with him had quieter words: narcissist, tyrant, emotional terrorist. But none of that mattered when you owned buildings in 12 cities and your face appeared on magazine covers with headlines like, "The Man Who Conquered the Sky." The emergency meeting that night was typical Vale, a crisis he'd partly manufactured through impossible demands. His team had been working 70-hour weeks on a new AI-driven flight management system. They delivered exactly what he'd asked for. He called it garbage. "This is pedestrian work," he said, pacing the boardroom like a caged animal. "I could hire undergraduates to produce this mediocrity. I expected innovation. I got recycled code and timid thinking." His chief technology officer, a man with 2 PhDs and 15 years of experience, tried to respond. "Sir, we followed your specifications exactly." "Your problem," Vale interrupted, "is that you follow when you should lead. You execute when you should create. You're all—" That's when the bucket fell. That's when Naomi appeared in the doorway. That's when Vale saw an opportunity to demonstrate his dominance to a room full of executives who'd forgotten to fear him properly. He approached her slowly, savoring the moment. The contrast was perfect. A cleaning woman in a faded uniform, face frozen in apology, versus him in his Tom Ford suit, master of everything she could see from these windows. "What is this?" he asked, knowing full well what it was but wanting to hear her stammered response. When she apologized, he felt the familiar rush. Power, control, the delicious confirmation that the hierarchy was intact. Trash always interrupts at the worst possible moment. He saw her flinch. Good. Fear was healthy. Fear kept the machinery of his world running smoothly. A janitor in my building should understand her place. Clean silently, or don't be here at all. Behind him, someone laughed. Others shifted uncomfortably, but no one defended her. No one risked Vale's wrath for a night janitor they barely noticed. What surprised him was her eyes. Most people looked away when he went on the attack. They studied the floor, the wall, their shoes, anywhere but directly at his face. She looked at him, not with anger, not with defiance, with something worse. Calm, as if she could see through him, as if she pitied him. It unsettled him for exactly 2 seconds before his ego reasserted control. He was Alexander Vale. He didn't need validation from someone who mopped floors. He returned to his meeting, recounting the encounter as comedy. "Even the cleaning staff interrupts me now," he said. "Perhaps I should fire the entire janitorial company. Send a message about respect." More nervous laughter, more silent compliance. He had no idea he just humiliated the one person in the building who could save his life. He had no idea that in less than half an hour, he'd need her expertise more desperately than he'd ever needed anything. He had no idea that karma had excellent timing. In the supply closet on the 48th floor, Naomi allowed herself exactly 90 seconds to fall apart. Her hands shook as she gripped the edge of the utility sink. The words echoed, "Trash, know your place, don't be here at all." She'd heard variations of this her entire life. Foster parents who treated her like cheap labor. Teachers who assumed she'd amount to nothing. Employers who paid minimum wage and expected maximum gratitude. But tonight hit differently. Because tonight she'd been insulted while standing in the same building that connected directly to her dream. The Gulfstream G700 sat just across the river at Teterboro, close enough to ache. She splashed cold water on her face, breathing slowly, using the techniques her therapist had taught her. Anger wouldn't help. Hurt wouldn't change anything. But competence? Competence was power they couldn't take away. Naomi pulled out her phone and opened the app she'd built herself. A custom flight simulator configured specifically for the Gulfstream G700. She'd reverse engineered the specifications from public filings, manufacturer documents, and pilot forums. Every system, every button, every emergency protocol. Her 80 real flight hours had taught her the feel of the skies. The 2,000 hours in simulation had drilled the G700's complex systems into her muscle memory. She ran practice flights during lunch breaks, memorized procedures while mopping floors, tested herself on emergency scenarios while riding the subway home. Perfect landings in crosswinds, engine failures, hydraulic malfunctions, electrical fires. She'd practiced every disaster scenario the aircraft could throw at a pilot. Not because she thought she'd ever fly it, because giving up the dream completely would mean accepting that Alexander Vale was right about her. Her phone buzzed. A reminder. Private pilot written exam in 6 weeks. She'd saved enough to register. If she passed, she'd at least have the credentials, even if rebuilding flight hours would take time. Small victories, incremental progress, hope measured in certification tests and simulation hours. She dried her face, straightened her uniform, and returned to her cart. The building was quiet now. The meeting had apparently ended. Executives filed out, avoiding eye contact with her as they passed. She cleaned methodically, muscle memory guiding her movements, while her mind flew patterns over imaginary runways. What she didn't know was that her dream and her nightmare were about to collide. What she didn't know was that the Gulfstream G700's advanced systems had just detected an anomaly during late-night maintenance. What she didn't know was that in the private hangar at Teterboro, warning lights were beginning to flash. What she didn't know was that a maintenance technician's careless mistake and a software glitch were about to create a crisis that would require exactly the kind of expertise that couldn't be bought or inherited. The kind of expertise that came from 80 hours in the air and 2,000 hours of obsessive study. The kind of expertise currently pushing a janitor's cart on the 48th floor. Sometimes the universe prepares you for moments you don't see coming. Sometimes survival skills become superpowers when circumstances shift. Sometimes the person everyone dismisses is the only person who can save them. Naomi was cleaning the 49th floor restrooms when she heard the first alarm. A low, pulsing tone, building-wide. Not fire or evacuation, something else. Her phone buzzed with the emergency alert every Orion Tower employee received. System error. Un-US engine activation at Teterboro Executive Hangar. All senior personnel stand by. Her heart stopped. Teterboro Executive Hangar. That was Vale's private facility. Engine activation. That meant one of his aircraft was powering up, unscheduled, in the middle of the night. She dropped her cleaning supplies and moved toward the executive elevators, her mind already racing through possibilities. The system wouldn't send a building-wide alert for routine maintenance. This was serious. Through the glass walls on the 52nd floor, she could see chaos erupting in the executive area. Alexander Vale stood at the private helicopter pad access door, shouting at his head of security. "Get the helicopter spooled up. We're going to Teterboro, now!" "Sir, the maintenance team reports the G700 is in a critical startup lock. The systems have isolated the fault and initiated full lockdown." "Then override it remotely." "Sir, they can't. The onboard computers have locked out all external access to prevent further damage." "Get me a pilot who knows that aircraft inside out." "Your 2 type-rated G700 pilots are in Europe, sir. It would take hours to get anyone qualified here." "Hours? That plane could be grounded for months." Naomi found herself walking forward before conscious thought caught up. Her mouth opened. Words came out. "I can help." Every head turned. The security chief looked confused. Vale's executive assistant looked horrified. Alexander Vale looked at her with pure contempt. "You?" He laughed, not with humor, but with genuine disbelief. "The janitor?" "I know that aircraft," Naomi said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I know the startup sequence, the override protocols, everything. This is an $80 million Gulfstream G700, not a mop bucket." Vale's voice dripped with condescension. What could you possibly know about? The G700 has triple redundant fly-by-wire with enhanced vision systems, Naomi interrupted, her voice gaining strength. Startup requires precise timing between the APU and hydraulic accumulator pressurization. If the APU ramps before the accumulator reaches threshold, the system flags a servo actuator fault and initiates protective lockdown. Exactly what's happening now. If you don't resolve it within 15 minutes, the safety protocols will vent hydraulic fluid and require a full depot-level inspection. Silence. Vale stared at her. That's precisely the error code they're reporting, the head of security said quietly. If you don't stabilize it soon, Naomi continued, repairs will run 8 to 10 million minimum, and the aircraft will be down for months. How do you? Vale started. Because I've studied that plane for 2 years, Naomi said. My 80 hours in real aircraft and thousands in G700 specific simulation mean I know every quirk. Right now, I'm the only person in this building who can guide your team through the recovery. The security chief looked at Vale. Sir, the helicopter's ready. We don't have time to wait for another pilot. She's a janitor, Vale exploded. I am not letting someone who cleans toilets anywhere near my... The alarm pitch changed. Higher, more urgent. A tablet in the security chief's hand flashed. Critical. Hydraulic lockdown sequence initiated. 12 minutes to irreversible vent. The head of security's face went pale. Sir, if that completes... Vale looked at Naomi, really looked at her for the first time. She saw the calculation in his eyes. Pride versus pragmatism. Ego versus $80 million. Get her on the helicopter, he said finally. Now. The company helicopter lifted off from the Orion tower pad and banked hard toward Teterboro, cutting through the cold November night in under 15 minutes. Naomi sat strapped in beside Vale, the head of security, and 2 pilots. No one spoke. The only sound was the rhythmic thump of the rotors and the urgent updates crackling over the comms from the hangar team. Hydraulic pressure still climbing. 10 minutes to irreversible vent. Systems fully locked. Vale stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment, visualizing the G700 cockpit layout she'd memorized 1,000 times. The helicopter touched down on the private apron outside the Orion executive hangar. The doors were already open, emergency lights strobing red across the vast space. And there it was, the Gulfstream G700, sleek white fuselage gleaming under the floodlights, wings spanning the width of a house, worth more than most people would ever earn. A machine currently in distress. Warning beacons flashed across the body. The auxiliary power unit whined at dangerous RPMs. A faint hiss of leaking hydraulic fluid escaped from an access panel. The lead maintenance technician, a young man in his late 20s named Marcus, rushed up as they deplaned, face pale and sweating despite the cold. Mr. Vale, I'm sorry. I was running the post-maintenance diagnostic, and I initiated the APU sequence out of order. The system's in full protective lockdown now. Vale started to unleash, but Naomi stepped forward. Marcus, right? She said calmly. Show me the diagnostic readout. Marcus glanced at Vale, who nodded curtly. Inside the cockpit, accessed via the lowered air stair, Naomi took the right seat while Marcus occupied the left, his hands hovering nervously over the controls. Vale stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching every move. The multifunction displays were a sea of red. 23 critical warnings cascading down the screens. Naomi scanned them once and saw the pattern immediately. It's not a real servo failure, she said. The APU ramped before the hydraulic accumulator reached pre-charge pressure. The fly-by-wire interprets that as a critical mismatch and isolates everything to protect the actuators. Can you fix it? Vale demanded. Yes, with Marcus running the physical resets and me guiding the software overrides. She turned to Marcus. You're going to manually cycle the accumulator bypass valve in the lower fuselage. There's a maintenance access port. I'll tell you exactly when. Marcus nodded and grabbed his toolkit. Naomi's fingers moved across the touchscreen interface with quiet precision, navigating through layers of safety menus to the buried engineering override that most line pilots never touched. "What are you doing?" Vale asked, voice tight. "Resetting the timing logic so the system believes we're initiating a clean startup from cold iron. It requires syncing 3 separate subsystems manually. That could brick the entire avionics suite if you get it wrong." "It could," Naomi said without looking up, "which is why we're doing it step by step." She spoke clearly into the intercom as Marcus worked below. "Valve open, hold, now close." The hydraulic pressure gauge twitched from deep red toward amber. "APU to idle, now." The high-pitched whine began to drop. One by one, warnings cleared from the screens. Marcus climbed back in, breathing hard. "Pressure stabilizing," Naomi announced. Final command entered. The last red warning vanished. The APU settled into a healthy, steady idle. The hangar fell quiet except for the soft hum of normal systems. Naomi leaned back in the seat and exhaled. "Hydraulics nominal," she said. "All systems green. Aircraft is safe." She looked down at Vale, who stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the now calm displays. "Your plane is fine," she said quietly. "You're welcome." Marcus climbed down from the cockpit first, giving Naomi space. The security team hovered outside, waiting for instructions. Alexander Vale remained in the doorway, eyes fixed on the now green instrument panels. He climbed the air stair slowly and stood just inside the cockpit, taking in the calm displays he'd feared would stay red forever. "How did you—" he started, then trailed off. Naomi unbuckled and stood, preparing to leave. "Marcus needs better training on the startup timing logic. And your safety protocols should have a secondary remote override. There's a firmware update Gulfstream released last year that adds it." "Wait." Vale's voice had lost its edge, replaced by something quieter, curiosity, maybe even uncertainty. "Where did you learn all this?" "Aviation Academy," Naomi said simply. 80 hours in real planes before I had to stop, thousands more in simulation. Specifically on the G700. "Why did you have to stop?" "Medical emergency, heart arrhythmia. The bills piled up faster than I could pay them. Scholarship gone. Dreams on hold." She moved to pass him. Vale didn't block her, but his hand hovered as if he wanted to. "That override sequence you just ran," he said, "that's not in standard pilot training. That's systems engineer level. I've had a lot of time to study. You've practiced this exact scenario. In simulation, hundreds of times." Vale shook his head slowly. "On this specific aircraft?" "I told you downstairs, I know your plane." "Why?" The question came out softer than he intended. Naomi paused at the top of the air stair, the cold hangar air drifting in. "Because when life takes everything else," she said quietly, "you hold on to what keeps you going. You study it. You memorize it. You practice it in every spare moment. Because letting go means accepting that people like you get to decide what people like me are worth." The words landed heavily in the small space. Vale opened his mouth, closed it. For perhaps the first time in years, he had no quick response. After a long moment, he spoke. "What I said in that boardroom, calling you trash, that was cruel, and it was wrong." Naomi met his eyes. "Yes, it was." "I want to hire you," he said, "as a pilot, starting with full sponsorship, training, certifications, flight hours, whatever you need to get your ratings and eventually type rated on the G700. Naomi stared at him. "Just like that?" "Just like that." She looked out at the darkened hangar, then back at him. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "This feels complicated." Vale nodded slowly. "I understand why you'd see it that way. Take the time you need." He stepped aside to let her pass. As she walked down the air stair, Naomi felt the weight of the night settling on her shoulders. Not crushing, but real. An offer that could change everything. From the man who tried to break her just hours ago. She wasn't sure what to feel. But for the first time in years, possibility felt close enough to touch. Naomi did not accept the offer that night. Back in her Queens apartment as dawn broke, she sat at her small kitchen table, staring at her phone. The events of the hangar replayed in her mind. The alarms, the overrides, Vale's changed tone. It felt too easy. Too much like pity wrapped in opportunity. She called Maria, the day shift janitorial supervisor, who'd become a friend over late-night shift handoffs. He offered to pay for everything. Training, certifications, the works, Naomi said. But hours ago he called me trash in front of everyone. Maria was quiet for a moment. What does your gut say? That I want to fly more than anything, but I don't want to owe him, or wonder if he'd turn back into that man the moment things get hard. Take time, mija. Real offers don't vanish overnight. The next day, Vale's formal contract arrived via courier. Detailed, generous. Starting salary far above entry-level pilot pay. Full funding for commercial license, instrument rating, multi-engine, and eventual G700 type rating. Housing stipend. And the unusual clause, a signed acknowledgement from Vale admitting his cruel behavior and committing to personal accountability training. Naomi visited the hangar during her regular shift, finding Marcus packing tools, head down. They're firing you? She asked. I screwed up an $80 million jet. Yeah. Naomi marched into Vale's temporary office at the facility. Marcus stays, she said without preamble. Retraining, supervision, whatever he needs. He's young, from a background like mine. Mistakes happen under pressure. Vale looked up from his desk. His error nearly cost. You're asking me for a second chance right now, Naomi cut in. How is he any different? Vale leaned back, studying her. After a long pause, he nodded. Fine, he keeps his job. Supervised probation and full retraining. Naomi wasn't finished. And this offer, it's not pity, not guilt? Vale stood and walked to the window overlooking the G700. No, it's recognition, belated and deserved. He turned to her. You know, I grew up in a trailer park outside Cleveland. My mother cleaned office buildings at night to keep us afloat. I swore I'd never be powerless again. Somewhere along the way, I forgot what it felt like to be looked down on. You reminded me, painfully. He met her eyes. I don't expect forgiveness, but the offer stands because you're exceptional, not because I feel bad. Naomi searched his face for the arrogance from the boardroom and found something raw, human. She thought of Maria's words, of Marcus, of the cockpit she just saved. I want one more thing in writing, she said. The training is unconditional. If I decide this environment isn't right for me after I get my ratings, I walk away. No penalties, no repayment. Done. And I keep my janitor shifts until I'm ready to transition. On my terms. Vale extended his hand. Agreed. Welcome to Orion Aviation, Naomi. She shook it, firm, deliberate. For the first time that week, she smiled. Small, but real. The story of what happened that night at Teterboro didn't explode across the internet overnight. It spread slowly, the way real consequences often do. It started with whispers among employees. The security team who'd been on the helicopter, Marcus quietly telling a coworker how the janitor had saved his job, and the plane. A few executives from the boardroom hearing rumors and putting pieces together. Within a week, an anonymous post appeared on a tech industry forum. A detailed account of a billionaire humiliating a janitor who later saved his prize jet. No names, but enough specifics that insiders connected the dots. A TechCrunch reporter picked it up. Then Bloomberg ran a short piece. Orion Technologies CEO's late-night crisis highlights workplace dynamics. The stock dipped 3% over the following days. A couple of major clients sent polite emails reviewing partnership terms. A speaking slot at a major aviation conference was quietly rescinded. Vail could have lawyered up, issued denials, buried it with PR. Instead, he chose a different path. He started small changes, no grand announcements at first. He raised base pay for all facility and janitorial staff to a true living wage for the New York area. He created a scholarship fund for employees and their families pursuing vocational or professional training. He scheduled monthly open forums where any employee from any level could ask him questions directly. Critics on social media called it damage control. Some former employees shared older stories of his temper. Skepticism lingered. But over the following months, people inside the company began to notice shifts. Vail interrupted less in meetings. He asked more questions and listened to answers. When a junior engineer pushed back on a decision, Vail didn't crush him. He considered it. He attended sensitivity and leadership training, not just mandated for others, but for himself. He met regularly with an executive coach. It wasn't perfect. Old habits died hard. There were setbacks, moments when the old sharpness slipped through. But something had cracked open that night in the hangar. Seeing Naomi, someone he'd dismissed so viciously, demonstrate not just skill, but grace under pressure, had forced him to confront a truth he'd long avoided. His dominance had made him blind. He'd built an empire on recognizing patterns in data, opportunities in markets. Yet he'd failed to recognize talent in a person standing right in front of him. The public consequences were real, but manageable. The personal ones were harder. For the first time in decades, Alexander Vail had to admit, to himself at least, that he didn't have all the answers. And real change, he was learning, wasn't a single dramatic gesture. It was 1,000 small, uncomfortable choices made day after day. 6 weeks later, Naomi stood outside the FAA testing center in New Jersey, her freshly printed private pilot certificate in hand. She'd passed the written exam with a 94, then crushed the practical check ride 2 weeks after. Vail had kept every promise: full funding for ground school refreshers, simulator time, and flight hours in light aircraft to rebuild her logbook. A dedicated instructor who worked around her janitor schedule. But Naomi had insisted on keeping her night shifts. "I'm not leaving until I'm ready," she told Vail. "This job kept me going. I finish on my terms." For those weeks, she lived a double life: nights cleaning offices, days studying and flying, weekends in the air. The janitorial crew knew bits of the story. Word had spread quietly about the hangar, Vail's offer, Marcus keeping his job. They didn't treat her like a celebrity, just with quiet pride. One of their own was making it. On her final night shift, the crew surprised her in the break room. A sheet cake from the corner bakery, handwritten cards, hugs all around. "You're gonna own those skies," Maria said, eyes shining. "But we're gonna miss you down here." Naomi's throat tightened. "I'll miss you too, more than you know." The next week, she transitioned fully. Her new office at Orion Aviation was small, but overlooked the Teterboro runways. A desk placard read, "Naomi Clark, pilot in training." Her training accelerated: commercial license, instrument rating, multi-engine add-on. Hundreds of hours building toward the ultimate goal, a G700 type rating. Her first flight in the Gulfstream came 8 months after that night. Vail met her at the hangar early one morning. "Ready?" he asked. "For what?" "Supervised training flight. I'm your safety pilot and instructor. FAA rules for initial type work." Naomi's heart raced as she pre-flighted the jet, hands steady but mind electric. They taxied to the runway, received clearance. "Your aircraft," Vail said from the right seat. Naomi advanced the throttles. The G700 surged forward, smooth, powerful, alive. Rotation, gear up, positive climb. The jet soared into the dawn sky over New Jersey, Manhattan's skyline glowing in the distance. The sensation was everything she dreamed and more. Not simulation, real lift, real wind, real horizon. "How does it feel?" Vale asked quietly over the intercom. Naomi couldn't speak at first. The view blurred slightly. "Like I've been holding my breath for years," she finally said, "and I just breathed." Below them, the world stretched out. Roads, rivers, lives unfolding. Somewhere down there, people were scrubbing floors, carrying hidden dreams, feeling unseen. Naomi hoped at least one of them could look up and see a jet climbing through the morning light and know what was possible. 1 year to the day after the night that changed everything, Naomi Clark returned to Orion Tower. This time, she entered through the main lobby like any executive. Security guards nodded respectfully. "Morning, Captain Clark." The elevator rose smoothly to the executive floors, no keycard required. She wore her pilot's uniform, crisp white shirt, 4 stripes on the epaulets, captain's rank earned through relentless training. Her commercial pilot license, instrument and multi-engine ratings were months old. She'd logged over 600 hours, including initial operating experience on the G700 under supervision. Vale had invited her to speak at the company's annual all-hands meeting. The auditorium held 3,000 employees in person, thousands more streaming from global offices. Backstage, Naomi adjusted her notes, nerves fluttering like pre-flight jitters. "You ready?" Vale appeared beside her, quieter than the man she'd met a year ago. "As I'll ever be." He smiled, genuine, understated. In the past year, their relationship had settled into mutual respect, occasional mentorship, even guarded friendship. The house lights dimmed. Vale took the stage first. "1 year ago," he began, "I made a serious mistake in this very building. I judged someone based on their job title instead of their character and ability. I was arrogant, cruel, and wrong. Tonight, I'm honored to introduce the person who showed me, and all of us, what real excellence looks like." Naomi walked out to warm, sustained applause. She saw familiar faces in the crowd, executives who'd been in that boardroom, now shifting slightly in their seats. Janitors from the night crew, sitting proudly in the front rows she'd helped reserve. Marcus, now a lead technician, grinning wide. When the applause faded, Naomi spoke. "1 year ago, I was cleaning these floors," she said. "I felt invisible, dismissed, called trash." The room was silent. "But I never stopped preparing. I studied. I practiced. I held on to my dream because it was mine. No one could take that away." She shared her journey, not for pity, but as proof. Proof that circumstances aren't permanent, that preparation meets opportunity in unexpected ways, that dignity is something you carry inside. "I'm not extraordinary," she concluded. "I'm stubborn. I kept going when it would have been easier to quit. And if anyone here or watching online feels stuck right now, in a job that doesn't see you, carrying a dream that feels impossible, keep studying, keep building. Your moment might come when you least expect it." Thunderous applause. Afterward, as people filed out, a young janitor in a familiar uniform approached shyly. "Miss Clark, I want to be a pilot too, like you." Naomi smiled and handed him her card. "Then start studying, and when you're ready, call me. We'll get you your first lesson." She watched him walk away, eyes bright with possibility. The cycle wasn't broken, it was just beginning again. The story of Naomi Clark and Alexander Vale isn't about instant karma or fairy tale endings. It's about the quiet power of preparation when no one's watching. It's about what happens when we choose to see people, not their job titles, not their current circumstances, but their potential. Naomi never needed anyone's permission to be extraordinary. She already was. The janitor's uniform didn't diminish her any more than the pilot's uniform completed her. Her worth was always there, steady, unshaken, even when others refused to see it. The most powerful moment wasn't when she saved the plane or took the controls for the first time. It was when she looked Alexander Vale in the eye after he called her trash and refused to crumble. That's real strength. Not fighting back with venom, not collapsing in defeat, just holding on to your dignity when someone tries to strip it away. Vale's change didn't happen in one dramatic night. It began with a crack, a moment of seeing himself clearly, and grew slowly, imperfectly, through consistent effort. Some days better than others. Real growth rarely looks cinematic, and that's the truth they don't always tell in these stories. People will underestimate you, judge you, dismiss you based on where you are right now. Your job isn't to make them see you sooner. Your job is to keep building skills, knowledge, resilience, so that when your moment arrives, you're undeniably ready. Naomi didn't save that plane through luck. She saved it through 80 hours in the air, 2,000 in simulation, and years of refusing to let go of her dream. Success isn't the moment the world finally notices. It's the thousands of moments no one sees. The late nights studying, the small victories, the quiet determination when quitting would be easier. So whatever dream you're carrying today, whatever feels out of reach from where you're standing, keep going. Clean the floors if that's what life requires right now. But never stop studying the cockpit, because one day, opportunity will show up in the form of a crisis, a chance, or a door you never expected. And when it does, you'll be the one they need. You'll be ready. And the view from the left seat? It's worth every second you waited. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own journey, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and drop your dream in the comments below. What are you still chasing? Let's build a community of people who refuse to give up.